Imagine you're going down to the bottom of the ocean in a 2026 Virginia-class nuclear submarine. You might think all you'd see are some giant squids or maybe just a completely black void. But what you'd actually see is the walls of the submarine completely closing in on you and crushing you to death. You're still cooked. If you want to get to the deepest point on Earth, you'd have to get to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, a place in the Western Pacific that's so deep even the most advanced nuclear submarines would have zero chance of making it to the bottom. And of course, in a world so deep and so inhospitable, we'd expect almost nothing to actually be down there. But for anyone who knows a thing or two about the horrors of the deep, you'd know this isn't the case. So what actually exists in the deepest place on Earth? Well, to understand exactly what is surviving at the bottom of the ocean, we first have to understand what the bottom even is. Most people think of the ocean. They think of the beach, the open water, and maybe a few coral reefs. But the open ocean is thousands of meters deep, and eventually it hits the abyssal plain. For 99% of the planet, the abyssal plain is the absolute bottom of the ocean. It sits around 4,000 to 6,000 meters below sea level, and it's a massive, endlessly flat wasteland of just mud and darkness. Even down in the abyssal zone, the pressure is already so completely unhinged that almost all of the famous deep-sea monsters would die if they lived there. Everyone assumes the giant squid lives at the absolute bottom of the ocean. They don't. They max out around 3,000 meters deep, and if a giant squid ever tried to swim down to the regular abyssal plain, the pressure would violently crush and kill it instantly. And for almost the entire Earth, the abyss is the usual biological limit for most animals on the planet. And for almost the entire Earth, the abyss is the final stop. It is the ocean floor after all. But the Mariana Trench isn't the ocean floor. The trench is a massive tectonic scar where the Pacific plate is physically being dragged underneath the Mariana plate, ripping open a gigantic chasm that plunges miles deeper than the normal ocean floor should be stopping at. The true bottom of the trench is 10,984 meters below the surface, which is so stupidly deep that our brains honestly struggle to actually comprehend it. And if you were to take an elevator down to the bottom, this would be like going down 3,580 floors. And for any Americans watching, this is exactly 99.7 football fields deep. The temperature is permanently sitting just slightly above freezing. And while faint amounts of sunlight do reach the deep parts of the ocean, there's nothing here. There's no up, no down, and no way to know who or what is around you. So what kind of animal could actually survive down here? Well, to survive in the trench, you have to be a very specific build. Every animal in the world is suited for its environment, and basically only its environment. Bring the most fierce lion to Antarctica, and it will die. Bring a bear to the middle of the ocean, and they'll starve or eventually drown. You have to be designed for the environment around you, or it's over. This makes sense, but for some reason, if you bring any deep-sea creature to the Mariana Trench, it also dies. The pressure is roughly 1,100 times greater than the standard atmospheric pressure we experience on land. That number sounds impressive, but it doesn't really mean anything until you visualize it. Imagine an adult African elephant. Now, imagine balancing the entire weight of the elephant on your thumb. Now put that elephant onto every single square inch on your body, all at the exact same time. That's what the water is doing to you in the Mariana Trench. Kinda scary for just water. Every single biological system we know of completely breaks down under this kind of force. Most normal fish rely on an organ called a swim bladder to float, which is essentially a tiny balloon inside their body filled with gas that helps them control their buoyancy. If you bring a fish with a swim bladder down here, that gas compresses so violently and instantly that the fish would implode. Rigid bones face the exact same problem. Human bones are incredibly strong, but they are porous. We have tiny microscopic pockets of space inside us, and under 16,000 pounds of pressure, these microscopic pockets of space become structural weak points, and they collapse. An empty space inside an animal is a guaranteed death sentence, so the most overpowered build down here is just the equivalent of living water. This is where we find the apex predator of the Mariana Trench, and the deepest living fish ever recorded, the snailfish. If you were expecting the king of the deepest place on Earth to look like a terrifying armored leviathan, well, it's not. I won't just make up crazy stories like Megalodon spotted in Mariana Trench to get you to watch. The snailfish looks a bit weirder than a normal fish. It is small, completely pale, and slightly pink. It has no scales. It has barely any internal bone structure. Its skull is literally left partially open so that its brain doesn't get crushed by the pressure inside its own head. Its flesh is completely translucent and completely gelatinous. It's kinda like a wet napkin, but biologically and scientifically, this is peak performance. The snailfish realized that you cannot fight the pressure of the Mariana Trench. If you build biological armor, the ocean will crack it. If you build dense bones, the ocean will snap them. So the snailfish decided to do something completely unhinged. It became water. Its entire body is heavily composed of a water-based gelatinous tissue. Because water itself can't be compressed, a body made mostly of watery jelly is functionally immune to hydrostatic pressure. It's basically just one with the ocean. It survives 8,000 meters deep because it simply bends instead of breaking. The pressure passes straight through its jelly-like flesh without doing any damage. They don't have a swim bladder. They don't have scales. They barely even have teeth. They just drift endlessly through the pitch-black freezing water, looking absolutely miserable, but successfully outliving every single giant monster in the ocean above them. They are the deepest living fish ever caught on camera. They are the undeniable rulers of the trench, because nothing else can even reach it without dying. But even a fish that looks like a jelly still has to eat. And in a place with zero sunlight and zero plants, what is fueling the bottom of the world? All life requires energy, and on Earth, almost all energy starts with the sun. Plants eat the sunlight, small animals eat the plants, big animals eat the small animals, and the cycle continues. But sunlight has never reached the Mariana Trench. Photosynthesis can't happen down there, so how is anything growing? Well, to put it simply, it isn't. There are no seaweed forests, no kelp, and no algae. Plants don't exist. Nothing grows. So everything down there relies on the most depressing food source imaginable: snow. Specifically, marine snow. This is exactly what it sounds like, but significantly more disgusting. It is a continuous, never-ending shower of organic debris falling from the upper layers of the ocean. After all, nothing really stops things from eventually falling to the bottom. It's made up of dead plankton, rotting fish carcasses, microscopic pieces of skin, and literal animal feces. The decaying sludge slowly sinks for weeks, drifting down miles of ocean water until it finally settles on the trench floor. But snailfish don't eat marine snow. Something else does. The hadal amphipods. Amphipods basically look like severe deformed shrimp. They swarm the bottom of the trench by the thousands. When a dead fish or a rotting piece of organic material finally hits the bottom, these amphipods swarm it like locusts and will strip it down to absolutely nothing. Honestly, these amphipods are actually pretty big, reaching nearly 5 centimeters. This might be showing a bit of deep-sea gigantism, even though most of the real giants already died long ago thousands of meters up. It's funny, because many people think of the deep sea as one region of the ocean, but the Mariana Trench is a completely different stage of deep sea. If you look at the midnight zone, which sits a few thousand meters above the trench, it can actually be somewhat lively. It's filled with bioluminescence, with things like anglerfish with glowing lures, squids flashing red and white, and other glowing jellies. But in the deeper sea, almost all the light stops. Producing your own light takes calories, but more importantly, maintaining complex eyes to actually see that light takes even more calories. The normal deep sea can be barren, sure, but it's nothing like the Mariana Trench. It's low food compared to the literal scraps of existence, which is why these creatures can only barely resemble some form of life. Because these creatures are so strange, they're actually part of a weird phenomenon known as trench isolation. And whether you blame it on evolution or say they did it to themselves, these creatures are stuck in the trench forever. When you're this adapted to the trench, you can't take a trip up to the midnight zone and then see a giant squid and then come back down to the hadal zone to hide from them. You can never leave. If a Mariana snailfish or a hadal amphipod decided it was tired of eating toxic marine snow in the void and tried to swim up even to the normal deep ocean, it would just die. What we think of as super deep isn't even deep enough for them. They would decompress and become an actual useless blob even before they reach the twilight zone. Once a species adapts to the Haddle zone, that species is trapped there forever. These guys spend their whole life sitting in the dark, surviving impossible physics, just to eat the absolute bottom of the barrel garbage of the ocean. But there is something more than just marine snow falling to the bottom, and in fact, only in the last century have these creatures suddenly found something new in their lives. Unfortunately, it's not a good thing. Even in the most untouched, unreachable world on Earth, there are footprints. A place where you'd never expect to see a single soul, there are signs of humans. When scientists finally managed to send robotic landers down into the Challenger Deep to collect those deep-sea amphipods, they brought them back up to the surface and opened their stomachs to see what they had been eating. They didn't just find marine snow. They found microplastics. Even at 11,000 meters deep, in a place where the pressure can crush a military submarine into a tin can, our garbage had already beaten us there. Plastic fibers from synthetic clothing, broken down pieces of plastic bottles, and industrial waste have made the weeks-long journey down to the absolute deepest crevices of the planet. And because the trench is essentially a giant funnel, anything that falls into it gets trapped there forever. The amphipods, completely blind and desperate for any source of energy, just consume whatever sinks into their path. We haven't even fully mapped the bottom of the ocean, yet our pollution has already fundamentally altered the diet of creatures that live miles beneath the reach of sunlight. It's a pretty brutal reality check. The ocean is massive, and the trench is just a small portion of it. But everything, and I mean everything, is deeply connected. But it isn't just our trash that made it down there. We actually did. Well, not you or me, researchers did, but you get my point. Of course, this has happened very few times. Sending a machine into the Mariana Trench is already difficult. Sending a human being into the Mariana Trench is borderline suicidal. Today, we have ultra-advanced titanium submersibles, which are way more specialized than nuclear submarines and remote-operated robots. But the first humans to ever reach the bottom of the Challenger Deep didn't have any of that. Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh made the descent in 1960. This was before the invention of the microchip, before we sent a man to the moon. They did it in a submersible called the Trieste. The Trieste was basically a giant gasoline-filled blimp attached to a ridiculously thick steel spear. It was not a sleek and definitely not a high-tech submarine. It was a crude, heavy metal ball that barely had enough room for two grown men to sit shoulder to shoulder. And yes, this worked better than any modern-day submarine that isn't specifically designed for the Mariana Trench. They locked themselves inside this steel refrigerator and they began to sink. The descent took nearly 5 hours. 5 hours of dropping through completely pitch-black water, watching the temperature plummet, and listening to the ocean aggressively compress the metal hull around them. When you dive this deep, every single creak of metal sounds like the end of the world. And at 10,900 meters deep, something actually broke. A loud, violent crack echoed through the tiny cabin. Under the stress of tens of thousands of pounds of pressure, one of the outer plexiglass windows had fractured. Imagine sitting in a steel ball miles under the ocean, completely cut off from the rest of humanity, and hearing a sound that tells you the ocean is actively breaking through your only defense. If that window failed completely, the water would blast into the cabin with enough force to vaporize them instantly. They successfully touched down on the bottom of the Challenger Deep, which kicked up a massive cloud of silt that had never moved in forever. They stayed at the bottom of the world for just 20 minutes before dumping their ballast and beginning the agonizingly slow ascent back to the surface. They survived, but barely. Of course, a giant refrigerator isn't really great for exploring the trench. So when modern technology finally went back decades later, what did the cameras actually catch sitting on the seafloor? When we finally sent down remote-operated vehicles, we were actually able to map the floor of the Mariana Trench in high definition. We expected to find mud, amphipods, and maybe a few ghostly snailfish. But instead, the seafloor was covered in tons of bizarre structures. They almost looked like coral or weird sea sponges. But these weren't coral, and they definitely weren't sponges. They were xenophyrophores. A xenophyrophore is a single-celled organism. Normally, single-celled organisms are microscopic. You need a powerful lens to even know they exist. But in the deep ocean, the rules of biology are entirely broken. These single-celled organisms have grown to the size of actual grapefruits. Biology just gave up on making complex animals down here and decided to just make one massive, highly functional cell. They are entirely mindless blobs of protoplasm, but they behave like deep-sea architects. They extract minerals from the mud, gather sediment, and glue it all together using their own biological excretions to build complex, branching structures. Even weirder, they are highly toxic. Xenophyrophores actively concentrate insane levels of heavy metals like lead, uranium, and mercury inside their own bodies. In a completely barren wasteland, these giant toxic cells basically build the only structure that exists on the trench floor. Their shells provide the only shelter available for tiny worms and amphipods to hide in. Even though they are just giant blobs of toxic jelly, they are functionally the ecosystem builders of the deep, and form the sort of coral reef systems that we see at the surface, but just a much more depressing one. So if the absolute deepest depths are ruled by jellyfish, specifically fish made of jelly and giant single cells, why does the Mariana Trench still seem so terrifying? People tend to think of the Mariana Trench as a really deep canyon, almost like an underwater version of the Grand Canyon. But the Grand Canyon is essentially just a dead rock that water slowly carved out over millions of years. The Mariana Trench is actually active. The trench was formed by a geological process called subduction. The Pacific Plate, which is a massive chunk of the Earth's crust, is physically crashing into the smaller Mariana Plate. Because the Pacific Plate is heavier, it's being violently shoved underneath the Mariana Plate, dragging the ocean floor down with it. The crust is literally being pushed down into the Earth's mantle to be melted. This means the trench is constantly moving. It is a site of immense tectonic friction, generating massive earthquakes and reshaping the seafloor in real time. The bottom of the world is actively trying to crush itself out of existence. The trench is actually getting deeper every year, but very, very slightly, by probably at most a few centimeters. This isn't really noticeable to the human eye, not that any human eyes are seeing anything down there. Also, sediment and other shifting rock can actually make it shallower. But in general, the Mariana Trench will stay about the same depth for at least the next 100 years. Well, as long as humans don't do anything too weird. You would also naturally assume that being 11,000 meters underwater would feel overall empty. With absolutely zero sunlight and no massive animals swimming around, the bottom of the trench should be the most silent place on the entire planet. So in 2015, a team of scientists decided to actually test this. They took a hydrophone, encased it entirely in titanium so the pressure wouldn't instantly implode it, and dropped it into the abyss. It sank for hours into the absolute pitch-black void. When they finally retrieved the audio and listened to the recordings, the trench was not silent. It was horrifying. The Mariana Trench acts as a gigantic acoustic echo chamber. Because sound travels much faster and further in dense water, the trench funnels and amplifies noise from the entire ocean above it. The hydrophone picked up the eerie, screeching sounds of the tectonic plates physically grinding against each other. It captured the haunting deep moans of baleen whales echoing down from thousands of meters above. But the craziest part is that they could literally hear the weather. The recording captured the Category 4 typhoons raging on the surface. You are 7 miles underwater. You are completely disconnected from the sky. But because sound travels as vibrations through water and doesn't get absorbed instantly, it's actually a really good way to carry sound. It's not like you could actually hear someone talking at the surface, but you can hear noise. It'd probably take around 7 or more seconds for the surface sounds to actually reach you through the water anyways. Even though sound travels fast in water, the trench will still make it take a long time to reach you. It's a creepy place, and yes, obviously insanely inhospitable, but that's mostly due to the environment, not anything in it. There is one other main creature I haven't mentioned that lives down here though, but it's not really a creature. We already know that deep-sea amphipods survive by eating the disgusting marine snow that falls from the upper ocean. But at the absolute deepest, most hostile limits of the trench walls, there is a completely different form of biology. Tucked away in the cliffs of the trench are mud volcanoes. These are geothermal vents spewing out boiling as well as toxic chemical fluids from the Earth's crust directly into the freezing water. And things actually live here. Microbes and bizarre bacterial mats completely cover these toxic vents. Normally, life requires sunlight to grow, or it requires eating something that already consumes sunlight, like plants. But if plants and sunlight don't exist at all, then you have to come up with something else. Instead of relying on the sun or waiting for dead fish to fall from the sky, these microbes extract their energy directly from the raw chemical reactions of the rocks. They take toxic gases like methane and hydrogen sulfide and they metabolize them into usable energy. This is called chemosynthesis, and it's literally eating the chemicals inside the planet. Funny enough, we probably share some DNA with these microbes. This is actually why NASA is interested in the trench, even though they seem like an unrelated space agency. The Mariana Trench is effectively the closest thing we have to a working, functioning, extraterrestrial ocean simulator. If you look at Jupiter's moon Europa or Saturn's moon Enceladus, you will see massive liquid oceans trapped underneath miles of solid ice. The pressure inside those alien oceans is completely astronomical. There is absolutely zero sunlight. Sounds a bit familiar. NASA realized that if they want to know if alien life exists in the solar system, they could just study our own clone first. These microbes are exactly the kind of thing astrobiologists expect to find on other planets. This, of course, doesn't prove there's guaranteed to be life, but it does guide us for what we could look for. So we know life exists at the bottom. But when you look at the sheer size of the Mariana Trench, what are the chances we missed something huge? People want to believe in giant sea monsters because the ocean is unbelievably massive. And when it comes to the Mariana Trench, human brains truly struggle to grasp the physical scale of what we are dealing with. A giant monster is just an animal. You can fight an animal, but you can't fight millions of tons of freezing dark water. The trench is over 1,500 miles long and 43 miles wide. In a 3D world, that's a ton of space to explore. When billionaire explorers like James Cameron or Victor Vescovo take a submersible down to the Challenger Deep, they are shining a tiny flashlight on a very large area. These cameras can only see a few dozen feet in any direction before the darkness completely swallows the light. Every single submarine, rover, and robotic lander we have ever sent down there has collectively seen a fraction of a percent of the trench. We can claim we understand the trench fully, but the answer is we really don't. Most of our knowledge is based off a few treks, along with the majority of our understanding from just applying the laws of physics. It's not physically possible for a tiger to live in the trench, but did we ever expect to see something like snailfish? This absolute lack of exploration leaves a massive amount of room for mystery. Does this mean a megalodon is secretly hiding in the dark? Well, my bet is no, just because of straight physics. This place isn't the place where the world's gonna hide a bunch of sea monsters. This place is to test the limits of life itself. But if someone does get proof of something huge, feel free to prove me wrong. My guess is it will probably lack enough brain power to even understand that itself exists. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. And if you do want to see our video on the Megalodon, check it out here. It's not in the Mariana Trench, but it's still insane.